Principle and Emotional Sobriety Core Value with Herb Kaighan. This is part of an ongoing monthly series by Dr. Alan Berger and Herb Kaighan running through 2023 and this year, 2024. Each step is covered over 3 months. The first step is Alan's perspective. Second step is Herb's perspective. Third month, rather, is a joint discussion with the two of them. You can find previous recordings on our YouTube channel and in our WhatsApp group's Google Drive link, and those will be in the chat, so keep your eye open for them. So tonight we welcome Herb Kaighan. He's my favorite. He's going to continue our look at emotional sobriety and the 12 steps. Herb will take another in-depth look at the Step 5 principle and emotional sobriety core value. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my favorite Herb, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say tonight.
Thank you so much, Susie. It's always a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Patrick, for setting this all up several years ago. It's really blossomed into a international and very inclusive library of resources, both in people and in terms of recording. I don't know how to confirm that this actually is being recorded. I'm not sure I heard that. So just make sure that if you want it recorded, it is being recorded. My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. My website is there on the screen. I plan on talking at the same time using PowerPoint to support, explain, confirm, elaborate what I'm talking about. Some people learn by hearing, some people learn by looking. Lots of different ways of learning. And that's what this is really all about, for you to learn some of the vocabulary and at least my take on understanding the big book's approach to the 12-step process. Full disclosure, I'm a recovered alcoholic. February 21st, 1984 is my sobriety day. I haven't had a drink or an inclination to drink since then. I got a sponsor when I understood that what it meant to be an alcoholic in a 12-step program. And I didn't know that my sponsor didn't know much about the program. But I took direction and I was willing. If you hear nothing other than that one word and you embrace it, willing, that is the key word that unlocks the mystery, I believe. It certainly was the key word for me. My story is a story for a different day. That's not why I'm here. I'm here actually to talk about step 5. And I'm also not here to give you a broad and deep understanding of step 5. I will give you, at least by my standards, a view of, a perspective of step 5. But it's going to be in the context of emotional sobriety, which is a long ways from physical sobriety. As I have experienced it, as I understand it, physical sobriety is accomplished through steps 1 through 9. 1 through 9. Are you hearing me, please? The big book and the step process does not guarantee any sobriety or abstinence until you finish the 9th step. I don't make this up. I read page 84. I'm a literal translator of the big book. I needed help with that. Each of the mechanics who took me through the steps, I didn't call them sponsors because they weren't. They were step guides. They were project managers at 5 years of sobriety, at 7 years of sobriety, at 10 years of sobriety, and at 20 years of sobriety. 4 different journeys with 4 different mechanics and step guides. Each time going over the same material, but with a different view from my own consciousness, but as well as their consciousness and their experience. Steps 1 through 9, promise, abstinence, recovery from addiction. Take a look, maybe not right now. I hope you don't get distracted by trying to follow me in the big book because I go kind of fast. But make notes about the page numbers so that you can verify or at least confirm for yourself what it is I'm talking about. Page 84. We are placed in a position of neutrality. I'm quoting. We are placed in a position of neutrality. See, at the end of the 9th step, we're not resisting, we're not fighting, we're not attracted to. We have neutrality with regard to our addiction, but not a moment sooner. There are promises in the 3rd step, page 63. There are promises in the 5th step, page 76, 75, page 75 in the big book. Each of them are giving an approximate of freedom, but not a guarantee. Page 84, at the end of the 9th step, please, at the end of the 9th step, not halfway through. The promises of the 9th step are indicated halfway through. But the final promise that isn't talked much about on page 84 with regard to our addiction is after we finish our 9th step. At least that's my interpretation of that page. And I believe that's what Bill means when on the 2nd title page of the big book, how many thousands of men and women have recovered. The 2nd title page, have recovered. That's neutrality. We're not fighting it. We're not inclined toward it. There's no energy. There's no valence. And then he says we enter the world of the spirit. Steps 1 through 9, the program of recovery. Steps 10, 11, and 12, the program of living. Emotional sobriety. That's when Bill began writing about it at 20 years of sobriety, 1953. Check it out, the 12 and 12, 12 steps and 12 traditions. It's populated with the phrase emotional sobriety. He was 20 years sober when he first began to realize that that was the next stage, or stage 2 recovery, as Ernie Larson says in his books published in the 1980s. But it didn't catch fire, even though Bill wrote his letter in 1956 and published it in the Grapevine in 1958. It didn't catch fire, even though he called it the next frontier. 1956, he called it the next frontier. Didn't catch on. Nobody heard it. Nobody got it. Nobody understood it. Nobody talked about it. Ernie Larson tried 20 years later, 1984. Dr. Berger kind of picked it up. I don't know whether he was the first, but he certainly picked it up at the turn of the century, right around 2000, and invited me to, in partnership, to begin to explore it. And that's what we continue to do. About emotional sobriety, using the steps and the step process to come to grips with self-regulation. A key word for emotional sobriety. All human beings, but especially addicts of any kind, have their emotions regulate their lives. As a result, we suffer. When we go through some sort of rite of passage from childhood to adulthood, from dependency to independency, we begin to take responsibility for our thoughts and our feelings and our actions. And we begin to be conscious. We begin Please hear that. We begin to really be conscious. And like the dimmer switch, which is one of my most favorite metaphors, the dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time. Light switch goes on immediately. That's what Bill had in his mountaintop experience in his second day in the hospital. Mountaintop, mystical, fabulous, life-changing for him. But as he says in Appendix 2, most of us will have a spiritual awakening, and that's how the 12th step now reads after the second printing of the big book, 1941. He changed step 12. He put Appendix 2 in the back of the book to explain why he made the change from spiritual experience to spiritual awakening. How are they the same and how are they different? Spiritual experience is like a light switch. Spiritual awakening is like the dimmer switch. Most of us have the dimmer switch, the spiritual awakening. Awakening. A little more electricity, a little bit more juice on a daily basis, on a one day at a time, on one step at a time, and the dimmer switch goes up and the lights get a little brighter and the lights get a little brighter and the lights get a little brighter until they're bright enough for us to see that we didn't see. And then eventually they're bright enough to see that we do see that we didn't see. And I'm not trying to be tricky or cute with my words. I'm trying to describe my very, very clunky and awkward experience. And the majority of people that I know have that clunky and awkward experience. It's not smooth. So we've looked at over the last several months, maybe longer than that, as Susie was indicating, this is at least a 2-year journey with Dr. Berger and I, looking at each of the steps individually. He has a different experience and a different perspective, as I do. We're both completely deeply embedded in the 12-step recovery through Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous through the 12-step process. We're completely embedded in that process. But he comes from a vast and deep training in psychology. I come from a vast and deep training in philosophy and theology. And each of those perspectives influences our perception and our reaction and our experience. And that's why I believe we're sort of a magical duo. We're like flip sides of the same coin, but with different vocabulary, different experiences, and a different way of presenting. Those of you who have seen us together will know that. And next month we will be together, I believe. One of these days we'll get together on this very call. So, step 5, admitted, very much like step 1, huh? Admitted we were powerless. Now we're admitting to God, to ourselves, pretty safe. God doesn't talk back, and I cut myself a lot of slack. This is about the 5th step, confession, if you will. That's what the Oxford group called it, the predecessor group to Alcoholics Anonymous. They called it confession. They had 6 steps. If you want to take a look at least a summary of them from one member's viewpoint in one of the stories in the back of the book, look at page 263. We don't use the word confession now. It has too much of a religious connotation. But the key is, and to another human being, not all the negativity, not all the drama, not all the trauma, not all of the emotional stuff. That's not what it said. It's on the screen here. It was what we were invited to do in the 4th step, get to the exact nature. The exact nature. What's the source of our suffering? We've already prayed. That's part of the format for this Berlin group discussion and gathering. We've already prayed the set aside prayer. It's a prayer. It's not my commitment to set aside. I am powerless to set aside. It's my commitment to invite the Spirit, whatever that means to you, to enter into my heart, into my mind, into my soul, bring the crowbar and open it up. Einstein had that insight. The consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. Translate. I cannot fix my mind with my mind because my mind is the problem. And anything my mind processes, the outcome has the problem embedded in it. I need to have help to be delivered to an experience that I don't even know exists, and I certainly don't know how to precipitate, and I certainly don't know the tools even to effectively make it happen. Full disclosure. This is my version of the set aside prayer. I'm not going to pray it. We've already prayed it. But the key is full disclosure. The one thing this man said to me, my very first journey, 1988, through the steps at 5 years of sobriety, right from the beginning, even before we started step one, he said, I want you to commit to full disclosure, no secrets. I want you to be transparent. I asked him, what does that mean? Because I didn't know. 5 years sober, although the big book is very clear, chapter 5, read it. Bill was very clear when he wrote the book in 1939. He was 5 years sober. Yep, Bill was 5 years sober in 1939. He wrote the book based on his experience with the Oxford Group 6 steps. He expanded them to 12 steps. That's a wonderful story for a different day. No secrets, he said. No secrets. Transparency. Your insides and your outsides match. Chapter 5, how it works. Chapter 5, all the way into the book, after his explanation of the problem and his explanation of the solution, Bill says, and this is how it works. This is how we get there for freedom from our addiction, how it works. And that entire page, well, 75, 80% of that page 58, is about rigorous honesty. I wonder what that means. Maybe it means rigorous honesty. Rigorous, radical, transparency. And when I asked my sponsor and I asked my step guide, they both said the same thing. The goal is to have your insides and your outsides match. I still didn't know 5 years sober what he was talking about, but I was willing to say yes because it sounded like the right direction. My insides and my outsides match. Transparency, full disclosure. Bondage of addiction. That's what we're talking about. There's another bondage. Unmanageability. We'll talk some more about that as we make our journey to the 9th step, and especially as we unpack step 10. Step 10, I believe, is the key tool of emotional sobriety, the bondage of self, the bondage of unmanageability, the second promise of the 12-step process. Right after Bill says on page 84, we are placed in a position of neutrality, he said, and we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. We enter the world of the Spirit, the second biggest promise. We enter the world of the Spirit, awaken. We enter the world of the Spirit, the world of manageability. We are invited to manage our lives. You may not heard that in many, many meetings. I'm saying it boldly and in your face. I hope you hear it, maybe even as a confrontation, maybe even as a challenge. We are invited to manage our lives, not on our own power, but in partnership with power. Read step 5 and the promise on page 75, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. God's my managing partner. 10, 11, and 12 allow me to have a vital and vibrant and effective relationship with that power. Daily reprieve not cured. Of what? Of our unmanageability. So we address our unmanageability by 10, 11, and 12. Step 10, identifying on personal inventory on the spot when we're disturbed and becoming undisturbed to be in alignment with reality as it's manifesting. Step 11, in case we missed it during the day, inventory at night, a radar sweep, and then in the morning asking for guidance. Guidance as to how to be in alignment with reality as it's manifesting on a second to second basis. And step 12, living by principles. These principles, the principles embedded in the 12th step. Bill never gave us a list of principles. Practice these principles. Practice these steps. Practice these value propositions, principles, guidelines, and guardrails. Universal, human. Principles, values. The first 9 steps are the program of recovery. Steps 10, 11, and 12 are the program of living, living free, emotional sobriety, living turned, the commitment we make in step 3, a decision to turn from what to what? From our self-centeredness to other-centeredness. From our self-centeredness, 4 through 10, it's all about self, 4 through 10, self and its manifestations. To live in 11 and 12, 2 sides of the coin, a relationship with other with a small o and with a large O, and a relationship with others with a small o. 2 sides of the coin, 11 and 12, 2 sides of the coin, God and people, 2 sides of the coin, one coin, one journey. Bill says on page 47 in the big book that willingness is the cornerstone placed on the foundation of an arch through which we walk to a new freedom. Step 1, willingness. That foundation is surrender. The cornerstone is the willingness. Step 2, that choice we make. God is or God isn't, page 53. And then the decision we make in step 3. We can have a relationship with that God that is. As long as we turn through the steps, especially steps 4 and 5. Full inventory of the shadows in us that block us from the light. And that first step in removal of the shadows is full disclosure, step 5, so that we can have freedom. Freedom from addiction. This is what we're working for in the beginning. Most of us don't even have a clue that we're working for freedom from unmanageability until, in fact, we confront it after we finish the 9th step and learn that emotional sobriety is the next invitation. An invitation, an invitation. Bill calls it in the 12 and 12 in step 6 and 7, the rite of passage. Well, he doesn't use that word, but he does say 6 and 7 are the steps that take us from being a child to being an adult, from being a dependent to be independent. So we need to identify all the instincts in us, the exact nature, instincts in us for the bondage of self. That what makes us unmanageable is our anger. What makes us unmanageable is our fear. What makes us unmanageable is Bill asks us to take a look at our sex inventory, but when I got underneath it, I saw it was all about dishonesty. The exact nature of my sex problem was dishonesty and secrets about which I felt a lot of guilt and shame. Now, Bill doesn't mention secrets by name, nor does he mention the words or even the concepts of guilt and shame. That was to come later in psychological development outside of Alcoholics Anonymous. But we know now these are dominant shadows in us that mitigate our relationship with the light. This is a wonderful image from darkness to light. Darkness, I heard the other day, is the absence of light. So we bring the light to dissipate the shadows. We bring the light to dissipate the darkness. Full disclosure, transparency. Our insides and our outsides match. No secrets was the key to the 5th step. The big book is very clear. Pick somebody. It doesn't say a minister, although it does suggest that if that's your preference, do that. It doesn't say a psychologist, but it does say if that's your preference, do that. No, specifically, it says both of those words. The tradition in the culture is that you pick somebody in your fellowship that, in fact, is a recovered person to whom you trust and you are capable of being transparent with. Notice I didn't say that you're comfortable with. You might be very uncomfortable. This probably serves you well if you are. This man said, when I knocked on his door after finishing months of work on a 4th step with him, he guided me through all of this 4th step development, as you can see laid out in the PowerPoint. Months of work. And I knocked on his door and he opened it and he said, "Do you have any secrets you're not going to tell me?" I said, "Well, good morning to you, Jerry." And he said, "No, seriously, Herb. If you have any secrets, go home. I don't want to talk to you. If you're not prepared to reveal everything that you're aware of that brings you discomfort, go home. I don't want to talk to you." Because he knew I was wasting his time and my time. Well, he had prepared me for that. It didn't really startle me, although it wasn't as pleasant as I had hoped because I was already very nervous. But what he did is he brought in, and we had a cup of coffee, and his home was empty. There was no possibility of anybody intruding. And he told me that nobody would be there until we were finished. And it took several hours. And in the beginning, we read pages 72 to 75. That's the material on step 5. Oh, sure, I had read it. Oh, sure, we had reviewed it beforehand. But now he felt this, and it's a good protocol for an icebreaker. He read the first paragraph. I read the second paragraph. He read the third paragraph, etc., until we got to page 75, where it says we now begin to give our 5th step. Then he went quiet, and he said, "Now you talk." He said, "You talk, I'll listen. I might make some notes, but I will give those notes to you. They're only because I don't want to interrupt you while you're talking. This is not a discussion. This is you to give me a confession to read to me what you wrote in your fourth step, word for word for word for word. I don't want you to editorialize unless you feel like you need to. We won't have a discussion unless we both feel we need to. But I will make notes of questions I might have, or observations that I might have, or insights that I might have that might be helpful to you later on. I hope you're hearing all of this, because this is my experience consistently with my step guides, as I did 4 different fifth steps. I talk, they listen. If I were to give a proportion, I talked 90% of the time, they talked 10% of the time. Just in terms of clarification and or confirmation. At the end, the big book suggests that we begin to have freedom. Begin to have freedom. That's the whole point. You saw the cartoon above. Here, the perspective is the same Herbie in prison. Herbie looking through the bars. Herbie doesn't know there's anything but bars in front of him. And what he's beginning to realize are there is no ceiling, there are no walls, there is no floor. And it's pathetic Herbie holding on to the bars, looking between the bars, thinking that he's in prison, and he's in prison of his own making. And step 6 and 7 will help me release the bars and drop them to the ground. And 8 and 9 will make it very clear and confirm. I am not a victim. I'm a perpetrator. At the very worst, at the very best, I'm an accomplice. But the truth is, I am not a victim. I am not a victim of people or circumstances or events or of my life. I may have been victimized, but today, as I sit in front of these men over a 20-year period, I am not a victim. The purpose of step 5 is to remove these shadows. In the coming months, we'll talk about step 6 and 7. Very small references in the big book, page 76. The first paragraph is step 6. Second paragraph is step 7. And that step 7 paragraph is just a prayer. So it would behoove you, if you're interested, for more information on step 6 and 7 to go to the 12 steps and 12 traditions, because it has a chapter on each. Bill wrote a commentary on each. Maybe an 8 to 10 page commentary on step 6, an 8 to 10 page commentary on step 7. The one on step 7 is about humility, a commentary on humility, a brilliant commentary on humility. Humility, coming from the Latin word humus, meaning earth or dirt. No negative connotation. It's about having a perspective of the truth. Humility, seeing and embracing the truth. Humility, I am not unique. I am not special. I am one of 8 billion people actually on this earth. I'll have 100-year run. Let's hope. But in the biggest picture of civilization, I'm a dot on the horizon, having really no significance. But I am the center of my life, and it is important to me. And I'll be conscious as I can be, and I'll contribute in the way that I can and am invited to. And those are the secrets to the success of emotional sobriety. No, seriously. Emotional sobriety, consciousness, step 11, contribution, step 12. That coin I talked about. Emotional sobriety is really, 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 really very simple. Become the best human being that you can be. Determine what your meaning and context is in terms of life. And then contribute in outflow to the humanity of to the community of humanity around you. I read a thesis on happiness prepared by a large scientific study from Harvard. And the conclusion was, if you want to be happy, you'll never be happy. If that's your only goal, to be happy, you'll never be happy, because happiness is a byproduct, not a product. If you want to be happy, find meaning in your life and contribute to the people around you. If you want to be happy, avoid suffering and embrace joy. No, hear the simplicity of that. If you want to be happy, grow up, be responsible, be an adult, take responsibility for your life, embrace joy, and avoid suffering. It's that simple. Well, but Bill says it, page 14 in the big book, in his own story. It's worth reading. Make a note of it at the top of the page 14. Simple but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Does that recap what I'm talking about? I'm going to repeat it. Simple but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness, steps 1 through 9. I must turn, step 3. That's a commitment to turn. I must turn in all things to the Father of light. Step 10, 11, at the least, who presides over us all. Step 12, practicing these principles, these inherent laws of reality, these universal truths, these values that are built into nature. Transparency. It's a goal. You perfectionists out there, please. And there's over half of you are like that. I know that from my own workshops. I've been doing workshops, weekly workshops, to take a group through the steps for 30 years. I know who you are. I know who I am. Cross the T's and dot the I's and just gnash our teeth when we don't live up to our own expectations or the expectations of others. We're talking about emotional sobriety. So we don't gnash our teeth or grind our teeth any longer from outside or even inside values that are created for us, not by us. This allows us to identify my values. And here's the real simple motto: to do the best I can, knowing that it's not the best I can, but it's going to be good enough. To do the best I can, knowing it's not the best I can, but it is good enough for right now. We reveal the exact nature, admitting, accepting, disclosing the truth. The truth will set you free, it said, but I'll add, but it will embarrass you in the process. That's a good thing. I needed to be embarrassed by the delusion of the lie that I believed to be the truth. Are you willing to go to any length is the challenge on page 58. How it works again, the very first page. It says, if you want what we have, which I assume is freedom from addiction and a happy, joyous, and free life, happy, joyous, and free, you heard it, it's from the big book. If you want what we have, are you willing to go to any length? It says dash, then you are ready to take certain steps. It's step 3, opening us up to steps 4 through 9, our way of life, our way of living, steps 10, 11, and 12. Because we're not cured, not of our addiction. We are definitely placed in a position of neutrality. That's the promise of the first 9 steps. But we can't hold it. We can't maintain it. We can't be consistent on our own power because, in fact, we're powerless for our unmanageability. Read page 62. Oh, please take a look at the definition of and the description of unmanageability, pages 60 to 62. The behavioral description of unmanageability on page 52, the second paragraph of bedevilments. I'm not going into it now. Do it on your own and see, go back to page 62, that second paragraph, and how it ends, that second paragraph. It ends in the same way that his conclusion on addiction ends on page 43. His conclusion on page 43, after he concludes his whole discussion on addiction, step one, there'll come a time and a place where we'll have no mental defense against the first drink, page 43. We need God. And on page 62, at the end of the second paragraph, and after his discussion of his elaboration of his definition of the exact nature of unmanageability, says, and we can't even reduce it much, meaning self-centeredness. We can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. We can't even reduce it much, not with the steps, not with prayer, not with service, not with sponsorship, not with helping, etc. There's nothing we can do. What does powerless mean? If there's anything that we can do, we're not powerless. If there's, oh, please hear that. If there's any one thing we can do with regard to our addiction, if there's any one thing that we can do with regard to our unmanageability, then we're not powerless. Use the word no choice. I have no choice with regard to my addiction. I'm screwed. I have no choice with regard to unmanageability. I'm screwed. Now, that I'm screwed is not in the big book. But it does say we're at the fork in the road. One was to go on to the bitter end. The other is to have a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, to live by spiritual principles. Are you willing to go to any length? How free do you want to be? My ultimate question to everybody that I ever have a conversation with. How free do you want to be? Free of addiction, certainly, the minimum promise. But free of unmanageability, yes. Free to manage your own life in partnership with power. God is my managing partner. I sit in the presence of God every morning. I sit in the presence of the mystery every morning. I sit in the presence of the Spirit every morning asking for guidance. And then I do the best I can to follow the guidance. Clunky all the time, getting smoother over time. How free do you want to be? I want to be free so that my life flourishes. How soon? That's really the key. How soon? How free? How soon? Thanks, everybody.
That was just wonderful. Thank you very much.